today the execution-style murders of 2 Australian police officers. Brothers, one of them a conspiracy theorist, and a woman are identified as the killers. They died in a 6-hour siege. The Queensland Police Union joins us. Kindness is kicked to the curb as the PM gets caught calling David Seymour an arrogant prick. They might be ugly, but we should love them anyway. Now, just to be clear, we've moved on from politicians to weird endangered creatures. Coromandel scallops are off the menu this Christmas because of an emergency ban, and the Rugby World Cup winners get a hero's welcome in Wally. Watch us on Sky Channel 83, Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Marie, good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. Daily COVID cases have surpassed 8,000 for the first time in the third wave and are the highest they've been for 4.5 months. But wastewater testing reveals fewer than half of cases are actually being reported. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn reports.
The Ministry of Health says 8,428 new cases have been reported today, up by about 1,000 on the previous Tuesday. The presence of the virus in wastewater is also increasing. The Greater Wellington region has the highest reported infection rate at 205 per 100,000 people, while Nelson Marlborough has about half of that. Hospitalisations have also increased in the past week, but deaths have fallen. Tuesday is usually the highest case day of the week because of a lag in weekend reporting.
The COVID-19 response minister says New Zealand is more prepared for a pandemic than it was at the start of 2020. A report by the Auditor-General has found New Zealand should have been better prepared when the COVID-19 pandemic hit. It describes pandemic plans as outdated and confusing and says officials had a limited understanding of emergency management. COVID-19 response minister Dr Aisha Verrill says things have improved since then.
I think it made a lot of reflections on the excellent work that public servants and central agencies did in the COVID-19 response, but it pointed out that there was more to be done with preparedness. Since then, we've made sure that we have built the preparedness of the system.
The Prime Minister has apologised to the ACT leader David Seymour for calling him an arrogant prick during question time this afternoon. Jacinda Ardern made the comment under her breath after a wide-ranging question from Mr Seymour covering hate speech, inflation, immigration and education. He was asking her to give the House an example of when she'd made a mistake and apologised for it. Ms Ardern did just that after calling him an arrogant prick at the end of the exchange. She texted him soon afterwards to say sorry. Mr Seymour says he thanked her for the apology and wished her a Merry Christmas. Prominent anti-vaccination lawyer Sue Gray has been released from custody in Nelson after being stood down by a judge for contempt of court. Last week, Sue Gray represented the parents of baby W in the High Court as they fought to use unvaccinated blood during their child's heart surgery. At a hearing in the Nelson District Court this afternoon, Judge Tony Zorab said Sue Gray was taken into custody for disruptive behaviour in the courtroom this morning.
And I told you in simple language, politely, on a number of occasions that I didn't need to hear from you on those points, and you repeatedly continued on. I told you repeatedly that you could appear as a Mackenzie friend, and I also told you very politely to sit down. I'd made my decision.
Judge Zorab has referred audio, video and a transcript of the court proceedings to the Law Society. Multiple investigations are underway in Australia after 2 police officers and a neighbour lost their lives in a shootout at a property in Queensland's Western Downs. They and 3 people suspected of ambushing the officers died. Both of the officers had been recently sworn in. And Senior Cabinet Minister Nanaia Mahuta is welcoming a report into conflicts of interest with businesses owned by her family. Public Service Commissioner Peter Hughes found serious flaws in how a number of government agencies identified or managed perceived or actual conflicts. But even though ministers' actions were outside the scope of the review, Mr Hughes found nothing which would require referral to another oversight body. Nanaia Mahuta says the review has drawn a line in the sand.
It's clearly stated that there has been no favouritism, bias or undue influence attributed to ministers in the way that contracts have been managed.
Nanaia Mahuta maintains she has been assiduous in declaring any conflicts of interest. In sport, Croatia and Morocco are the surprise guests in the Football World Cup's Final Four in Qatar, and both long-shot semi-finalists are planning on an upset. Argentina are favourites with the bookies to win the first semi-final tomorrow, but Croatian defender Dejan Lovren feels good about his side reaching a second straight final.
Let's go, like I said, step by step. We will see. We have now the confidence really again high, but we need to be with the feet down on the earth. We know everything is possible, just to keep moving on.
France play Morocco in the other semi-final on Thursday morning. Morocco will operate 30 special flights to carry fans from Casablanca to Doha for the game. Former Masters champion Yang Bingtao has been suspended from the World Snooker Tour as part of an investigation into match fixing. The world number 16 was due to play at the English Open this week, but was banned following allegations of manipulating the outcome of matches for betting purposes. Yang is the sixth Chinese player suspended during the match fixing investigation. And young New Zealand driver Liam Lawson has officially confirmed he will leave Formula 2 for the Super Formula Series in Japan next year. That's the news.
An unhappy MIQ patron.
Sometimes apologies have become a cliche. You know, you can kind of do anything wrong so long as you apologise at the end of it.
A wayward truck wheel.
Flying across the first two lanes and almost taking out some patrons at the K Sushi bar, and then actually smacking into the wall of Bow Repair's tyres.
And an iconic train stop.
Taumranui, Taumranui on the main trunk line.
Your daily commute morning report weekdays 6 till 9 here on RNZ National.
And we're on air on rnz.co.nz and on your mobile. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. From Northland to Waikato, also for Bay of Plenty and Gisborne. Showers, some heavy, easing this afternoon and fine breaks increasing. Rain developing tomorrow, possibly heavy in the east. Waitomo, Taranaki, the central high country and Hawke's Bay. Scattered showers with thunderstorms possible, clearing tonight, becoming cloudy tomorrow with scattered showers. Whanganui to Kapiti, also Wairarapa. Scattered showers, possibly heavy and thundery, clearing overnight. A fine start tomorrow, then increasing cloud and isolated showers from the afternoon. Wellington, Marlborough, Nelson and Buller, mostly fine. Isolated showers developing tonight, mainly inland. Westland and Fiordland, cloud increasing. Rain developing south of the glaciers tonight, then clearing tomorrow evening. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mainly fine. Patchy low cloud in the east, clearing tonight. Scattered showers developing tomorrow afternoon. And Adekohu, Chatham Islands, low cloud, occasional rain clearing tomorrow morning. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I will have news headlines and traffic for you at 5:20.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint te tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It's been described as an execution-style killing. 2 Australian police officers and an innocent bystander have been shot dead in an ambush at a Queensland property. Rachel McCrow and Matthew Arnold, aged 29 and 26, were following up on a missing persons report when 3 shooters, 2 men and a woman dressed in camouflage, opened fire. It happened yesterday afternoon in the tiny town of Waimbilla, population about 100 and about 300 kilometres from Brisbane. 2 other police officers managed to escape, both injured. A neighbour was also fatally shot. The 3 killers were shot during the siege. Joining us now is Queensland Police Union President Ian Levers. Thank you for joining us, Ian, and first off, our sincere sympathies for the death of your 2 officers. What do you know now? Sorry, Ian, what do you know now about what happened at the property?
What we do know is it was a routine business as usual call for service in relation to making an inquiry about a missing person. And police have attended to this rural location, and police have gone over the fence. And as soon as that has happened, the murderous cowards, the trio of them, of immediately starting firing rounds at the police. The 2 police were hit. They dropped to the ground, and their 2 colleagues who were coming in behind them, they managed to retreat and seek cover. And what I do know is these murderous cowards, which is what I will call them, have then gone up and executed the 2 police who were lying on the ground. This is something that has never happened in Queensland, and the shock to people in the local community and the ripple effect it's had across the state of Queensland, Australia and New Zealand, it's been too much to bear in many ways. And even people coming to the police station of all ages, all walks of life, are just coming up and showing their support to police. But what I do know is after the police were executed, one of the female police who retreated, she hid in some long grass, and these cowards have then lit the grass to try and flush her out. And she thought that if she stood up, she would be shot dead or she would be burnt alive. Fortunately, that didn't occur, and the male constable, who was also had retreated, he had gone back, he had been shot, he got into the police vehicle, and the vehicle was shot at, and fortunately both of those police have survived this. They spent the night in hospital, or the male police officer is still in hospital.
Ian, I understand the officer who was hiding, and when they set fire to the grass, I understand she made calls, is that right?
Yes, she did. She was contacting police, letting them know what had occurred, the location, to try and get assistance as quick as possibly could be. But in rural Australia, it is sparse, and support did come along. But to her credit, she displayed incredible bravery in doing what she did on communicating with her colleagues when she actually believed that her life may very well come to an end.
And her family, did she contact them too, Ian?
Yes, I know she contacted her mother, and she thought that her life was coming to an end, and she'd actually accepted that fate in some ways. But what is more interesting, she's only got 9 weeks service in the Queensland Police Service, and the bravery that she displayed, and her colleague as well, is absolutely incredible. And fortunately, she was rescued by other police, and these murderous cowards did not get their way. But what I do know then is one of the local sergeants got a team of up to 16 police, and they went in, and our colleagues who were lying motionless on the ground, they were actually, whilst they were being fired at, they pulled the colleagues away to a place of safety. But sadly, our 2 colleagues had already passed away. And so the bravery shown there, they just wanted to try and do what they could. And even just as tragic is the neighbour who went to investigate the fire, he was shot in the back. He did not even see it coming, and he has also lost his life. So 3 innocent people, through no fault of their own, have been murdered by these cowards.
Ian, these people are described as being dressed in camouflage, and obviously, well, what kind of weapons do we know? It sounds like they were prepared, Ian. What do we know about that?
Well, and it is because it was a BAU call for a missing person inquiry, but clearly, and that is what we don't know, is they were armed with an assortment of weapons, a lot of ammunition, and they continued to fire well into the night. Now, our Special Operations Police, who ended up taking over, they continued firing relentlessly through the night. This was horrific, and clearly there was a plan in place, but our police had no information or intelligence to suggest there was a risk, and really they were sitting ducks, and that's exactly what happened yesterday afternoon. And it's a tragedy, and these things shouldn't happen. And as we know, what happened later is our specialist police tried to negotiate with these murderers, and when their lives were put at risk, they have resolved the situation, and the 3 murderers are now deceased.
Is there any suggestion, Ian, or is it being investigated whether these people, the killers at the property, whether they drew the police there intentionally?
Look, part of the investigation will be to look at that and to see if there is any intelligence to suggest that, because this is not a normal thing. This is far from normal, and obviously we want a thorough investigation. That will be done by the Queensland Police, as well as an investigation on behalf of the coroner in Queensland, to see if there was anything to suggest this may be the case. It's because this is just bizarre. This is not normal. These execution-style killings don't happen in Queensland. We've been very fortunate, but we don't know, but hopefully we can get something out of the investigation which may shed some light, which will be of assistance to the families of our fallen police and also the colleagues who are suffering tremendously at this point in time. They're trying to come to terms with the grief that has taken place. And I know police are thinking, well, that could have quite easily been me. But that's the nature of our job. We never know. It is unpredictable, the nature of our work. We never know what will occur when we go to work, and we may never come home. But that's across Queensland, it's across Australia and New Zealand, and it's affected all police, I know, in Australia and New Zealand, because I've been in contact with my colleagues in every state as well as New Zealand.
Ian, we really appreciate your time today. Thank you for joining us. And again, our sympathies extended to you and your fellow officers. That is Queensland Police Union President Ian Levers there. It is 5:15. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Prime Minister's been caught calling ACT leader David Seymour an arrogant prick in the House this afternoon. Jacinda Ardern quickly apologised and David Seymour accepted, wishing her a Merry Christmas. The unfortunate muttering came hours after the government announced the departure of 3 ministers who will hang up their hats at next year's election, as well as 3 backbench Labour MPs. The Prime Minister announced the exodus this morning ahead of her planned cabinet reshuffle early next year. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
The Christmas countdown is on as 2022 grinds to a close, and it's clear everyone's in need of a summer break. The Prime Minister's trademark kindness slipping in Parliament today, caught out calling ACT leader David Seymour an arrogant prick. The remarks barely audible, few noticed in the debating chamber.
Oh, is that right? I'm sure she wouldn't use that language.
You know, a lot of things get said in the House, and I'm sure that worse has been said by them.
Do you think David Seymour's an arrogant prick?
Pass. Fortunately for Jacinda Ardern, the man himself's not too fazed.
Oh, look, Jacinda Ardern texted me and said, I apologise, it's not something I should have said. And she said, as my mum would say, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it. I agree with the sentiment, and it's all good as far as I'm concerned.
The Prime Minister will be hanging out for a holiday, as will most MPs, and there's nothing like a short break on the horizon to contemplate an even longer one.
If I'm wanting to pursue other interests while I've still got plenty of gas in the tank.
It is the right time for me, and I feel good about the decision.
You know, in this life, it's all-consuming. It's relentless.
3 ministers throwing in the towel, announcing they will call it a day at next year's election. Potter Williams, the former police minister, is one of them. Her year's been no easy one, stripped of her portfolio by the Prime Minister for losing focus.
I have no regrets except for the fact that I don't spend enough time at home.
David Clark is also on his bike, best remembered for his COVID-19 rule breaking while Health Minister in the early days of the pandemic. Remember this?
I have made a fool of myself. I have got this completely wrong.
Under normal circumstances, I would sack the minister.
In hindsight, all I can think is, what an idiot.
Not so keen to reflect on that today.
I think I've made clear in the past what my biggest regrets are.
The last out of the ministers calling time is Opito Williams-Seo, the Minister of Pacific Peoples and MP since 2008. And already planning his Samoa summer.
Take my shirt off, not answer that phone call, not wear a tie.
Another 3 Labour backbenchers will join the ministers in retirement, all from the 2017 intake. There's failed Wellington Mayoralty candidate Paul Eagle, List MP Maya Lubeck and Hamilton East MP Jamie Strange. The exodus could be seen as a lack of confidence in Labour's chances next year. A new Taxpayers Union Curia poll today puts Labour back in opposition, 33% compared to National's 39%. Jacinda Ardern says that the parties all have their own personal reasons for leaving. Don't read into it.
We've got a strong team, 64 MPs. 6 have decided they're going to do something else. That is not unusual.
Oh, gosh, you guys, don't believe yourselves.
We are in for a fight next year, but it's a fight that we can win.
Their ministerial colleagues also confident they want to stick around to see where they'll land in the Prime Minister's reshuffle early next year.
Oh, I'm keen to spend more time with my portfolios.
Still plenty of work to do.
That's an ageist accusation.
Winston Peters sets the standard. I've got a long way to go.
There's just one more day at Parliament, though, before it shuts up shop for the year, and it cannot come soon enough.
Deputy Political Editor Craig McCulloch there, 19 after 5, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai all for Carl. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Well, name-calling in Parliament, if you like, and the death of those two very young police officers in their 20s in Queensland, Australia. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Evie's standing by with the headlines. Ko Evie anō tēnei.
Daily COVID cases are the highest they've been for 4.5 months, but wastewater testing reveals fewer than half of cases are actually being reported. The Ministry of Health says 8,500 new cases were reported today, up 1,000 on last Tuesday. The Greater Wellington region has the highest reported infection rate. Prominent anti-vaccination lawyer Sue Gray has been released from custody in Nelson after being stood down by a judge for disrupting a hearing. Judge Tony Zorab has referred audio, video and a transcript of the proceedings to the Law Society, saying he questions Sue Gray's professional judgment as a lawyer. Last week, Ms Gray represented the parents of baby W in the High Court as they fought to use unvaccinated blood during their child's heart surgery. Multiple investigations are underway in Australia after two police officers and a neighbour lost their lives in a shootout at a property in Queensland's Western Downs. 3 people at the property were also killed during a search for a missing man. A $115 million treaty settlement for Wairarapa iwi has passed its final reading in Parliament. The settlement for Ngāti Kahunganuki Wairarapa Tāmaki Nui Arua passed unanimously, marking an end to more than 30 years of negotiations. And residents in Auckland's eastern bays are calling for repairs to wastewater and stormwater networks to stop contamination of beaches. Yesterday, 10 beaches were closed after wastewater pipes overflowed, contaminating them with faecal matter. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic. In Auckland, a crash that's now clear of lanes on State Highway 1 northbound just after Tristram Ave on-ramp has been causing significant delays. And in the South Island, State Highway 1 north of Herbert in Otago is now fully open after a crash late this afternoon. Those, I will have more news headlines and some traffic news, if there is any, at 40 minutes past 5.
Ngā mihi, Evie. Chalk this one up in the not a good look file. A match-fixing scandal has broken out in the seemingly prim and polished world of snooker, with 6 top Chinese players now suspended pending an ongoing investigation. Sports reporter Clay Wilson joins me now. Okay, wow, we hear about, match-fixing and all the rest of that kind of stuff, but snooker? Really?
Yeah, this is a bit more than your local pool hall, the pool shark turning up and taking people's money. This is a professional level, the top level of the sport. And when you think about a sport like snooker, you think quite clean cut. The players wear the suits with the black and white with the suit vests, and it's very formal, and everyone's quiet. And perhaps a sport where you think maybe this wouldn't happen, but money involved, and of course when money's involved, anything like this can happen. Corruption, match fixing, those kinds of things. This started last week. 5 Chinese players were suspended relating to potential match fixing, and then this week it just went up a notch because the world number 16, a player by the name of Yan Bingtao, he is now implicated in this match fixing scandal. Like I say, 16th ranked in the world, 22 years old, touted by a lot of people as a future champion. So not just some player in the back end of the world tour sort of doing his thing. And the governing body said that these match fixing these suspensions relate to allegations of manipulating the outcome of matches for betting purposes. So it's what happens, we see in a lot of sports really. It relates to gambling and betting on
someone
matches
taking a fall so that the bet comes good for whoever's placing it.
So how do you do it in a sport like snooker? I mean, I don't go down to the local pool hall.
Easy for me, who can't really hit a ball.
But it is a game of fine margins, very fine margins, where I think it probably would be.
You'd have to be a skillful player to fake it.
Yeah, I think the better you are, almost the better you would be at perhaps doing something like this and faking it and making a few mistakes, so to speak. So, it's clearly a game where it happens because this is where we are. And on top of this, for snooker, in October, another Chinese player by the name of Liang Wenbo, he was suspended, and that was because of convictions for domestic assault. So you've got 7 players suspended here, 6 for match fixing, 1 for domestic assault. Not a good look for snooker, but not a good look for any sport to be in this kind of situation, is it?
Absolutely. Okay, on a more positive note, semi-finals have arrived at the Football World Cup. 2 superstars going head-to-head tomorrow morning. Give us the dates.
Yeah, so this first semi-final tomorrow morning, Argentina against Croatia, and this is essentially being billed as Lionel Messi versus Luka Modric. These are 2 players who are both in their mid-30s, most probably the last chance to add a World Cup title to a very impressive individual resumes. Players who have achieved a lot on their own. You talk about Lionel Messi, 7 Ballon d'Ors as the World Player of the Year, numerous club titles, almost 800 professional goals. But he's 35 years old now, hasn't won a World Cup. Luka Modric took Croatia all the way to the last World Cup final in 2018, won him a Ballon d'Or for the Player of the Year. Has played at Real Madrid, one of the world's big clubs, for a long time, won a lot of titles, but he's now 37 years old. So they're at that age where if they don't win it now, they might not ever win it and add that, like I say, to their resume. So the winner of this game plays the winner of the second semi-final on Thursday morning, which is France against Morocco. And then we have our final on the weekend. So, yeah, getting to the real nitty-gritty stage of this tournament now.
What time do you have to be up to watch the game?
No, very good time. 8
good.
o'clock, both these games, tomorrow and Thursday morning, 8 o'clock. So get up, have it with your coffee.
Cornies or whatever.
Exactly.
Who are you supporting tomorrow, Clay?
Well, I have to say, my pick coming out of the group stages was France, and I'm still supporting France. But tomorrow...
Well, no, that's for the ultimate, but tomorrow...
Tomorrow... I think Argentina. It just feels like perhaps destiny.
Okay, well, I'm going for
Messi.
Croatia then, because the builders across the road are flying Croatian flags at the moment.
Someone will be gloating tomorrow night.
It's me versus you, Clay.
Exactly.
Let's see how it turns out. Thank you for that,
Thank
Clay
you.
Wilson with Sport. Coromandel scallops are off the menu this Christmas and for the entire summer, in fact, after the government rushed in an emergency ban. A section of the fishery was closed earlier in the year. Now camera footage has shown a significant decline in the shellfish across the remaining open area. Minister of Oceans and Fisheries, David Parker, says the emergency measure is rarely used, but monitoring results paint a dire picture. Legacy Program Lead, Sam Wolford, joins us now. Kia ora, Sam. Do you support this ban?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we've been calling for some kind of more proactive movements like this for a long time.
3 months, though, is it long enough?
No, well, that's the thing. It was kind of elation, but then the next question is, well, what's next? Because what we've seen with the quota management system is clearly a decline of fish stocks. Clearly something's not going right. So we do have to look to the future and realise that the status quo is not working. What do we have to change here?
So, Sam, paint us a picture. How bad is it in this area?
In those two areas, we don't know, so we haven't actually seen the NIWA-led data yet. But if it's an indication, we did a citizen science survey in Opedo Bay not that long ago, and we found one legal-sized scallop for every 20 square metres. Now, that is pretty appalling. That's not okay.
So what do you think is the cause?
Mismanagement is the simple answer. So we've taken far too many scallops and we've used really destructive fishing techniques for too long. So this is decades of mismanagement. And finally, we have to say thank you to Parker, because Minister Parker, he has done something quite audacious. He has been proactive. But
he disagrees with you, though, Sam, on the overfishing thing. He says it's a number of factors that have led to the situation, including climate change, warming water, problems with sediment on the ocean, not just overfishing.
Yeah, but those have to be managed in the fisheries management system. So we have to acknowledge that the climate is changing, and that should be a factor that reduces or increases the amount of fish that we're allowed to harvest.
Wasn't there a rahui that was brought in, I think it was 2020? Did that do nothing?
Actually, there were two. So both Ngāti Hei and Ngāti Manuhiri both laid rahui in order to protect the scallops, and that was through anecdotal evidence indicating that there was a problem. So back then, the community knew that something was wrong. And the lack of action for this period of time that's what's probably the most alarming.
So is there anywhere now in New Zealand where there is a commercial take of scallops?
No. So I think that scallops are the first species under the quota management system to be off the menu.
So that's it?
That's it. And I'm cautious, but I don't think we'll see it opening up anytime soon. And that's a really sad moment. We've actually got an industry here that's effectively been managed into extinction.
So when you said, what was it, one scallop of the right size for every, what was the measurement you gave? 20 square metres? 20
square metres, exactly. So two kind of big pools.
So how long does it take you to come back from that then?
Well, see, that's the problem is because scallops broadcast spawn. So they actually release the eggs and the sperm into the water column, and then they mix up to create fertilised spat. So we need density. We need scallop beds with density to actually repopulate wider areas. And without that density, that's a really good question. It might not come back.
So there is a review. This is a short-term measure. The ban lasts for 3 months. There's a more widespread review. I think it comes back in April of next year. What would you want from that?
Well, I think we've got to acknowledge the fact that scallop dredging is really destructive, and we've got to change the way we behave. So it's time to actually eradicate scallop dredging and bottom trawling from the Hauriki Gulf Marine Park. We've got to implement more sustainable harvest measures, and we've got to acknowledge the fact that, yes, there's ocean acidification, and yes, there's climate change, and all of those need to be considered when we reset any limits if and when this fishery opens.
So, Sam, what happens to the Christmas menu then? People, eat scallops from a country that may not be as eco-friendly even as us?
Well, yeah, I guess that's a really good consideration. Crayfish considered functionally extinct, scallops closed. Kaimuan is not looking good for the Christmas table this year, is it?
Thank you for your time, Sam. Really appreciate it. That's Sam Wolford, who's from the Legacy group on that. Well, it's an emergency ban that the government's brought in over the Coromandel area, so no taking scallops off the menu for Christmas. It is 5:30. Kia mau tunu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is time for the business news. Ko taku hoa e Nainei, ko Nona Peltier, who joins me in the studio. Okay, house prices. They're going down, down, down.
So if you're a shopper, probably very good news.
Still not cheap, though.
No. And if you're trying to sell, probably less good news about that. I mean, we all know that prices are heading down. We know that interest rates are also heading up. And so that isn't new. But what is new, I guess, is that the effect of that is starting to really hit home across virtually every region in the country. There's a few that are standing out from that. Southland and Westport had record growth, annual growth, but the rest of the country, not so much. We saw a drop of nearly 4%, according to the Real Estate Institute's sales numbers, and listings down 26%. So for agents, that means it's taking longer for them to do deals. Yes, they're still active in the market. There were more than 5,000 buyers in the market last month. Last month. But the prices that they're paying are considerably down from a year ago, 12%. So the median house price, that's across the country, fell by $10,000 to $810,000, and that's from October. So sales were a little bit up from October, but overall down a third on a year ago. However, that was the peak. And also, we heard from the quotable values. They say that values have dropped more than $100,000 from the start of the year. So overall, the market is looking like it's still sliding. I spoke with the Real Estate Institute's chief executive today. She thinks that it's going to take a while for prices to stabilize and turn around, and that's going to be when interest rates seem to stabilize, but not just that, when the market it begins to believe that the economic downturn has stopped.
That we've hit the bottom.
Yeah, and that could be a while. Sure.
Okay, another cheery story you bring for us today, Nona, which is food prices. Yep.
Yeah, so that's another one. It's moving in the opposite direction. We had a huge increase in food prices last month. The annual increase was 10.7%, and that's the highest since 2008, I believe. And mostly, not surprising, it was groceries that drove up those prices. A 10% increase. Now, fruit and veggies up 20% than the year earlier. And when you look at groceries, the big movements there were cheddar cheese, yogurt, milk, and that's within the grocery lot. So it's dairy, which we've heard how dairy prices are going. I mean, it's not the first time we talked about Fonterra lifting their outlook, and farmers, of course, getting the benefit of that. So, yeah, somebody's paying, and it's certainly going to be consumers. For example, in November, we usually see a price drop in fruits and veggies as they come into season. But this time we saw prices up 1%. And that compares with, the usual. So these aren't great numbers, are they? Let's move on. What do you think?
So what I want to know then, Nona, from our listeners, 2101 on text, is are you adjusting your Christmas menu? If you celebrate Christmas and you have big Christmas dinner, are you tweaking the menu? based on the prices here, or are you going with the traditional and just sucking up the extra costs? Let's find out, Nona. 2101 on text. And so, all right, let's move on to the market numbers then. What have you?
Well, as I just mentioned about Fonterra, the farmers are in for perhaps a good return of capital. That's one thing that Fonterra had been talking about. They've just announced the sale of their joint venture, share in a joint venture company that they have in Brazil. It's going to be about $210 million. That's the sale price. They're going to get 51% of the proceeds. That's going to be part of the deal that Fonterra presents to farmers at some point in the next year, where they're going to return some capital. So that was good news for Fonterra shareholders, and certainly that was reflected in the overall market numbers. Fonterra finished up 2.6%, but overall the index had a really strong day. It ended up 0.8%. That was a 95-point gain to 11,601. So, and also the market in Asia was looking quite good. For the dollar, it's again unsettled there by uncertainty about the U.S. state of the U.S. economy and where interest rates are going to go there. 63.8 U.S. cents, though, is 94.6 Australian, which is fairly strong, and 52 British pence.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite. Nona Peltier with Business News. Wellington commuters are in for more disruption with news that about 40 trains won't run until the end of January. It says the increase in unplanned cancellations is because of staff shortages. Other services will be replaced by buses or have reduced capacity from today. And while industry leaders say the government's immigration changes are on the right track, they won't be a silver bullet. Soumya Medipati reports.
Absolutely, positively, public transport cancellations. Wellington is down at least 120 bus drivers, and yesterday more than 40 train services were cancelled because of short staffing. On the capital's streets, people say it's been a battle to get on board.
So I checked Metlink and all the trains were cancelled, and then I checked the buses near me and they were also just not stopping by my stop, so I had to end up driving in, which is quite frustrating because I do have a train pass.
When I came down from the Kapiti Coast on the train and there wasn't a service for an hour and a half, it only happened once, but...
I usually wait like 10 minutes or so, but this morning it was like 20, 25 and people was just like waiting there. We didn't know. We checked a couple of times.
It used to be just every second train was cancelled, so like 7:15 or 7:45, and you could get them at like 7 and 7:30 and 8, but now they're just all cancelled.
The government's announced a temporary tweak to immigration rules for bus and truck drivers, with Cabinet and the sector still to work out the finer details. Ben McFadgen from the Bus and Coach Association says the changes will help, but implementing them will take months. And he's not expecting a flood of bus drivers when the new rules do come into effect, because they aren't being promised permanent residency.
From, the Philippines or Sri Lanka or something, I want the opportunity to be the life. I can drive a bus and become part of the New Zealand community. That'd be a great sell to someone. But then saying, we just want you for 2 years and then we're going to send you home, not so much.
And while the move may entice bus drivers from overseas, it won't do anything for the capital's railway system. Greater Wellington Regional Council's chairperson, Darren Ponter, says the recent disruptions are unusual and seem to be caused by high levels of staff sickness.
We'd love to have more drivers on the network. It takes 9 months to train a driver. So the fragility that we've got at the moment, it could be with us just for a little bit longer.
Metlink says reducing trains will create a more stable timetable, and it's expecting fewer cancellations over the holidays when the Christmas timetable comes into effect. But while service providers are advising people to plan ahead, passengers say it's just not that easy.
Just quite hectic in the mornings because you have to plan around it more than you kind of expect to, and you can't tell if they're going to be cancelled the day before. You always have to just check in the morning.
Because I'm visually impaired and I'm reliant on public transport, so it happens at least once a week. It just means that I have to be earlier cope with any change once I get to the station.
If you calculate an estimated time that you will normally make it to work or studies or whatever you're gonna do, and the bus doesn't come on time, it means that you're definitely gonna be late. And planning, it doesn't work out that well.
Passengers left waiting for a bus, train and a solution.
If you're a Wellington commuter, let us know your reckons on the disruptions to the train service. Homai o whakaro 2101 on text, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is 20 minutes to 6, well, almost, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. China's desperately trying to boost capacity at its hospitals and clinics, particularly in rural areas, amid a surge in COVID cases. The country is scaling back its tough restrictions and seems to have abandoned its elimination policy. Most people haven't had COVID before and are bracing for the worst. CNN's Christy Lee Stout has more.
In this restaurant in Wuhan, China, getting a table isn't a problem. Owner Zhu Chongping says even though China revised most of its COVID-19 restrictions last week, the customers have yet to return.
On our street, people are still struggling. They all believe that life will go back to the way it was after reopening. Everyone has this fantasy.
It is a wary reopening in Wuhan, which was the epicenter of the COVID-19 pandemic 3 years ago. Many small business owners say even though people are freer to move about, there are less customers than before. The streets aren't as bustling as they once were, and some businesses remain closed. Restaurant owner Zhu says people are still afraid of COVID.
Now that things have opened up, it also means the positive cases are all out. No one comes to the restaurant.
Last Wednesday, China lifted many of its strict COVID restrictions following protests against the country's zero COVID policy. In many places, QR codes are no longer needed to enter public spaces, mass testing has been rolled back, and some people are allowed to quarantine at home. But as more people resume contact, there are fears of more scenes like this line of people waiting outside of a fever clinic in Wuhan. Experts say China has fallen short on vaccinating the elderly with boosters, stockpiling antiviral medications, and improving surge capacities in hospitals. And some people worry that could mean more outbreaks.
If we were in lockdown, at least all the asymptomatic cases would either be quarantined at home or sent to makeshift hospitals. But now with everything opening up, all these people are out, so the infection rate is high. I have a lot of friends who already have a cold or fever, and I'm one of them too.
There are reports of some pharmacies selling out of fever medications. Many people bracing for a new wave of sickness. The price of moving away from a zero COVID policy means learning to live with it.
It is 18 minutes to 6 and time for some of your feedback now on house prices. This person says, as house prices fall, can our rates please fall too? They rise hugely at the last valuation with no increase, of course, in services, this listener says. So it would be nice to see them fall in line with QV. Adam says, get real, low house prices is good. Are they low though, Adam? They're just a bit lower than what they were before. It is 18 minutes to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaro, keep your feedback coming on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Get in touch. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time to go to the headlines now. Anei e iwi mena pitipita kōrero.
The Queensland Police Union says a police officer only in the force for 9 weeks showed huge bravery during a bloody rural shootout. 2 police officers, a neighbour and 3 shooters lost their lives last night at a property in Queensland's Western Downs. The union's Ian Levers told Checkpoint that despite being in grave danger herself, the officer called for backup. The Prime Minister has apologised to the ACT leader, David Seymour, for calling him an arrogant prick during question time this afternoon. Jacinda Ardern made the comment under her breath after a wide-ranging question from Mr Seymour covering hate speech, inflation, immigration and education. The COVID-19 response minister says New Zealand is more prepared for a pandemic than it was at the start of 2020. A report by the Auditor-General describes the country's pandemic plans in 2020 as outdated and confusing. The minister, Dr Aisha Verrill, says things have improved since then. Meanwhile, daily COVID cases are the highest they have been for 4.5 months, but wastewater testing reveals fewer than half of cases are actually being reported. 8,500 new cases were reported today. And prominent anti-vaccination lawyer Sue Gray has been released from custody in Nelson after being stood down by a judge for contempt of court for disruptive behaviour. The judge has referred audio, video and a transcript of the proceedings to the Law Society. Last week, Sue Gray represented the parents of baby W in the High Court as they fought to use blood from an unvaccinated person during their child's heart surgery. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, there may be residual delays on Auckland's northern motorway after a crash just after Tristram Ave on-ramp. That seems to be all at the moment. Our next full bulletin and weather is at 6 o'clock.
Kia ora, Evie. We love you even if you're ugly. That's the message from the Endangered Species Foundation as it tries to encourage Kiwis to sponsor some of Aotearoa's rare but less cute creatures. It's nominated 6 weird and wonderful species that people are able to virtually adopt themselves or as a Christmas gift even by donating towards their survival. Well, joining us now is the General Manager of the Endangered Species Foundation, Natalie Jessup. Kia ora, Natalie. I'm wondering, should I be offended on behalf of these creatures? Who says they're ugly?
Well, I guess they're not necessarily what you would describe as charismatic megafauna, which is what we often see out there. And so, we just wanted to really draw attention to some of our rarer species here and enable people to select one of these endangered species and gift or adopt one as their own. So our aim is to raise funds for these projects and, draw attention to what needs to be done.
I want to talk about this specifically, the 6 creatures, shortly, but I'm really interested. So what role does the cute factor play when it comes to getting financial assistance for endangered species? Do people go for the pretty ones?
I think it's proven to be pretty successful. And so there are organisations that will, promote, say, the big whale or the fluffy tiger, because people do really identify with those species. But it's really, there's so many out there in Aotearoa at the moment that need help. So there's about 7,500 species that are at risk of extinction. And our philosophy is that we love them even if they're, overly fuzzy or not particularly attractive, or they might even just be really tiny. So, I think probably historically we've given to the cuter, more fluffy, big animals. But, there's a real need out there for species right across the whole spectrum right now.
Natalie, fuzzy can be cute, Tell us about the fuzzweed moth, one of the 6 on your list.
Oh, so the fuzzweed moth is actually kind of cute. Like, it was discovered in 1989 and it's our only moth in New Zealand that's active in the day, and it's got a really fast and erratic flying style, and it's only found in 6 sites in central Otago. So, and it only feeds on the fuzzweed daisy, so it's quite particular with what it likes.
Okay, and I see here that you can give someone a shag for Christmas. Please explain.
Yes. Oh, okay. So shags are rarer than you would think. So we decided, why not just enable, if you want a shag or you would like to gift a shag to someone who you think would like one, we have put that on our website as well. So it's the Chatham shag. And
I think that bird is quite attractive, Natalie.
Well,
don't think
we
so?
may have chosen that one for the name.
Right, okay. We'll let you off on that one.
It's in the eye of the beholder.
Okay, so the giant weta fungus, tell us a little bit about this fella.
Yeah, well, so this giant weta fungus has actually only ever been seen twice ever. So once in 1922 and once in 2014. And
let's be honest, Natalie, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is for the benefit of people who are listening rather than watching. To be honest, it looks like it's got a terrible life-threatening disease, doesn't it, when you look at it?
Yeah, and it does actually take over the giant weta. So but then at the same time, we're here to advocate not just for, the creatures that we can identify with, but even down to the microorganisms in soil and fungi. Everything plays a really important part of the ecosystem. So even giant wetter fungus has a part to play.
So if people want to gift one of these creatures, virtually adopt them themselves, where can they go and check these little guys and girls out? And what is the process for gifting?
Oh, so it's really easy. They just have to go to our website, which is www.endangeredspecies.org.nz, and just put in the amount they want to donate, and everyone will get an adoption certificate for your species and a link to a fact sheet with more information. So you can just find out all the quirky little interesting facts about these species.
And you can chuck that adoption certificate in someone's Christmas stocking. Thank you, Natalie. Really appreciate your time. That is Natalie Jessup, who's from the Endangered Species Foundation. There's 6 of them that they've nominated. You should really go online and check them out. We'll put a link on our website. There are some very interesting creatures. The Public Service Commissioner has told several government agencies to tidy up their processes when looking into how contracts were awarded to relatives of Nanaia Mahuta. However, Peter Hughes has found no evidence of favouritism, bias or undue influence. Our political reporter Giles Dexter has more.
4 agencies were found to have awarded contracts to consultancy businesses owned by relatives of Nanaia Mahuta. She says she was assiduous in declaring her conflicts of interest and they'd been handled appropriately. The request for an investigation came from the minister herself, who was concerned stories over the conflicts were persisting.
I think at a personal level, it's been very clear what the motivations have been.
The Public Service Commissioner says Te Puni Kokiri and the Ministry for the Environment failed to properly identify and manage perceived conflicts, while a perceived minor conflict with Kainga Ora wasn't identified as the agency didn't even ask. There were no conflicts in relation to the Department of Conservation, but Peter Hughes found its contract management was poor. National's Public Service spokesperson Simeon Brown says it's clear there are serious flaws.
If this is happening here, where else is it happening across the public service? And when it comes to taxpayers' money, New Zealanders expect high standards.
Public Service Minister Chris Hipkins says Nanaia Mahuta should feel some comfort from the report.
Ministers have been acutely aware of issues of conflicts of interest. I've seen no evidence to suggest that Nanaia Mahuta has done anything wrong here. If anything, I think she's been very, very aware of the potential for there to be a conflict and has managed that very well.
Nanaia Mahuta believes it's put the issues raised about her to bed.
It's clearly stated that there has been no favouritism, bias or undue influence attributed to ministers in the way that contracts have been managed.
The Commissioner has now told the agencies to strengthen the model standards for how they identify and manage conflicts of interest. But ACT's David Seymour still has questions.
No one's really explained why any of these contracts were valuable to the taxpayer in terms of what they delivered, regardless of how they were signed up.
Chris Hipkins says conflicts of interest will always exist in a country like New Zealand, but it's about how they're managed.
This is always a timely reminder that the public service needs to set a high bar when it comes to the way they approach issues around conflict of interest. And I'm confident that the work the Commissioner has done, the Public Service Commissioner has done, will actually result in some changes across the broader public sector.
The Commissioner says how conflicts are managed can either build trust in the public service or erode it, and it's fundamental the public service gets it right.
Giles Dexter reporting there. The European Parliament has been engulfed in a corruption scandal with allegations that Qatar has bribed EU officials to try and win influence. The EU Parliament President says the Assembly will be launching an internal investigation over the claims. The BBC's Jessica Parker has the latest from Brussels.
The enemies of democracy, for whom the very existence of this Parliament is a threat, will stop at nothing. These malign actors linked to autocratic third countries have allegedly weaponized NGOs, unions, individuals, assistants and members of the European Parliament in an effort to subdue our processes.
The details of this case so far is partly what has shocked people across Brussels and beyond. So Belgian prosecutors came out on Friday and said that they carried out a series of raids on properties across Brussels. They'd seized €600,000 in cash And as well, over the weekend, we learned that among those arrested, 4 had been charged. Among them is reported to be Eva Kaili, who is this Greek MEP, a vice president of the European Parliament, one of 14, although she has now been stripped of her powers by the European Parliament President, Roberta Metsola. Also reportedly charged Francesco Giorgi, a parliamentary assistant, and her partner, Eva Kaili's partner. So among the 4 charged, we are told. Now, I think for MEPs, the European Parliament, it's going to raise some big questions. And the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, has today come out and said there is a question now of public trust in the institutions of the European Union. Qatar, it's worth saying, of course, currently hosting the World Cup, so story comes at a slightly awkward time for the Gulf state, but they are very much denying any accusations of misconduct. We've also contacted Eva Kaili's office for comment, but we haven't yet heard back. But I think for the European Union, for the European Parliament, this will be a subject of extensive debate and discussion. It'll be almost anyone is talking about, not just what revelations have come out so far, but also how deep this could potentially go.
It is 6 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. The world-beating Black Ferns have been formally celebrated at Parliament a month after winning the Women's Rugby World Cup. Fans packed Parliament lawns in Wellington today to get up close to their heroes. Our reporter Bridget Tunnicliffe and cameraman Angus Drever were there.
Walking down Parliament steps to meet their fans. The Black Ferns were formally celebrated and congratulated for their extraordinary win. Autographs and selfies were the order of the day. Fans young and old lined up to meet the world champions.
I want to see the whole crew today because I'm trying to do that. Yeah, I'm trying to get all the crew, and my hands are completely filled with signatures now.
So you've got most of the team's signatures?
Yeah, I'm trying to get the whole team too. Yeah.
Were you into rugby before the World Cup?
I didn't know until the World Cup, yeah. Just until they started the World Cup, and then I'm like, okay, let's just watch them. Hopefully they win. I'm going to support a bit too.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern told the crowd the Black Ferns win was a moment in time people will never forget.
We will remember where we were when we watched those games during the World Cup, but we will especially remember where we were for that final. And for those who were lucky enough to be there in person, they will remember the experience of a lifetime. And that's because they got to see in person how powerful this team is.
Fan favourite Ruby Tui explained the side's like never before motto.
We wanted to do something like never before. All the adversity that came at us every day, it was all good because it was say less, like never before, keep it going. So like never before was something we came up with, we rolled with every day. And if there's something you want to do that nobody's done, don't worry about it. Like never before. That's you, that's us, that's all of us. Let's do it.
For several weeks, Aotearoa was engulfed in Rugby World Cup fever as the Black Ferns overcame the major setbacks of 2021. Co-captain Kennedy Simon believes they have inspired a new generation.
I even heard from somebody, I went to a school and one of the kids said we never had enough girls playing rugby because they had to play with the boys and the parents didn't like it, and now they've got enough to field their own team. So yeah, I think it's going really well.
And there's no doubt the success of the Black Ferns is rubbing off.
Have you got a full set there or?
Kinda.
The main ones?
Yeah, the main ones, yep.
What were the main ones for you?
Stacey and oh my god.
And Renee.
Yeah, Renee, yes.
Renee. We see you.
You guys had a good day?
Yep.
Yeah. Pretty cool you guys got to come out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you guys play rugby?
Yeah.
Yep. Were you into rugby before the World Cup?
Yeah. Yep. I started when I was 5. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
And do you have dreams? Are your dreams bigger now as a result of?
Yep. Black Fern, hopefully.
The Black Ferns Thank You Aotearoa tour continues in Auckland on Sunday.
It is almost 6 o'clock. Let's squeeze in some feedback before we get to the news. On ugly creatures, this is the call for people to adopt an ugly endangered creature. You can gift them as a present by making a donation. William has got in touch to say, "Dear Lisa, I am happily prepared to be an ambassador for the weta. They look like the last insect put together by leftover parts and quite prehistoric. Indeed they do. I'm now getting on a bit," says William, "and can't help a shag." That is a reference to to the Chatham shag, which is one of the endangered creatures that you can sponsor. Another person says, in New Zealand, historically, if it doesn't have feathers or doesn't fart, it doesn't get good funding. There are so many more endangered plants than endangered birds that never get sufficient funding. And Rod from Wellington's got in touch and says, loving the story on non-charismatic creatures. I would love to adopt David Seymour, says Rod. On staff shortages, one listener says we can't keep importing people for jobs. We are in a recession. We're going to be in a recession. We import more people, we'll create a dangerous situation. On the issue of scallops, now this is the move. David Parker today, Minister for Oceans and Fisheries, has put an emergency closure notice on the Coromandel, so no collecting scallops there at all over the summer. An extended review due back in April. Mike from Hamilton says, hi there. For decades, successive governments have pandered to the demands of a rapacious fishing industry. Scallops were harvested using destructive GPS-guided commercial dredging techniques. This has trashed vast areas of seabed, just like ploughing up a vast undersea paddock. Should have been banned years ago, reckons Mike. Another person on the same issue says nothing new, unfortunately. In the past 20 years, scallops have been fished out in Marlborough, Golden Bay, Tasman Bay, Kaipara, Stewart Island, Wellington, Chatham Islands, etc., etc.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening. Ngā mihi o te pō, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. Prominent anti-vaccination lawyer Sue Gray has been released from custody in Nelson after being stood down by a judge for disrupting court. Sue Gray was supporting Golden Bay man Calvin McKinney in the Nelson District Court this morning when Judge Tony Zorab ordered her to be removed after ongoing disruption. Outside court, Sue Gray says she's requested the transcript from the proceedings and she plans to review it.
In the big picture, it is what it is. But I am very keen to listen to the transcript again of what actually happened this morning because the judge's recollection was certainly different from mine.
Judge Tony Zorab has since questioned Sue Gray's professional judgment as a lawyer and says he'll refer the audio, video and a transcript of the court proceedings to the Law Society. An inquiry has found the emergency housing system is seriously flawed. The Human Rights Commission has just released damning findings identifying 3 breaches of human rights. It says emergency housing is often not clean, dry, safe, secure or in good repair, and that people are being evicted into homelessness. The Commission also found the government has breached human rights by changing the law to exclude emergency housing from standards in the Residential Tenancies Act. At any one time, close to 9,000 New Zealanders are living in emergency accommodation. The Prime Minister has apologised to the ACT leader for calling him an arrogant prick during question time. Jacinda Ardern made the comment under her breath after a wide-ranging question from David Seymour covering hate speech, inflation, immigration and education. Ms Ardern texted Mr Seymour soon after to say sorry. Several senior ministers were asked about the comment as they left the debating chamber, including Kelvin Davis.
You know, a lot of things get said in the House and I'm sure that worse has been said by them, so I don't think they should be pointing fingers.
David Seymour says he thanked Jacinda Ardern for the apology and wished her a Merry Christmas. The Queensland Police Union says an officer who had only been on the force for 9 weeks showed huge bravery during a bloody rural shootout. 2 police officers, a neighbour and 3 shooters lost their lives last night at a property in Queensland's Western Downs. Union President Ian Levers has told Checkpoint, despite being in grave danger herself, the officer called for backup while hiding in long grass, fearing for her life.
These cowards have then lit the grass to try and flush her out, and she thought that if she stood up that she would be shot dead or she would be burnt alive. She displayed incredible bravery in doing what she did on communicating with her colleagues.
Ian Levers says the officer survived along with 1 other colleague and spent last night in hospital. National says the Public Service Commissioner's report into conflicts of interest shows there are serious flaws. Peter Hughes found some government agencies failed to properly identify or manage conflicts when awarding contracts to family members of Cabinet Minister Nanaia Mahuta. He's now told the agencies to strengthen their standards. National's Public Service spokesperson, Simeon Brown, says there needs to be an explanation as to why they weren't being managed properly in the first place.
If you look at the recommendations, all of these rules were already in place. And so what he's saying is actually follow the rules. And so the reality now is they need to actually follow the rules and make sure this doesn't happen again.
The Commissioner found no evidence of favouritism, bias or undue influence in decisions made by the agencies. Daily COVID numbers are the highest they've been for 4.5 months at 8,428. It's the first time the reported cases have breached 8,000 in the country's third wave. The Ministry of Health says only about 44% of actual cases are being reported. Last week, there were 589 people hospitalised, a jump of 142 on the week before. Gore District Council has appointed first-term councillor Keith Hovell to fill the vacant Deputy Mayor's role. New Mayor Ben Bell initially selected Stuart McDonnell as his deputy, but almost as soon as the appointment became official, he faced a call to step down from a majority of councillors. Gore District Council has been beset by controversies since the 23-year-old Mr Bell defeated long-time incumbent Tracy Hicks at October's elections. Mr McDonnell nominated Mr Hovell, who was appointed unanimously. Mr Hovell was not one of the 7 councillors who called for Mr McDonnell to go. A member of the best-selling pop group BTS is beginning mandatory military service in South Korea. Fans have been asked to stay away from the camp where Jin is based. The BBC's Jean Mackenzie reports from Seoul.
As North and South Korea are technically still at war, all men here must serve at least 18 months in the army, and South Korea's biggest celebrities are no exception. 30-year-old Jin will first complete a gruelling 5-week boot camp before reportedly being stationed near the North Korean border. Many young men in South Korea begrudge this military service for taking them away from their studies and work, meaning there could have been significant backlash if BTS had been allowed to skip it. But Jin's enrolment has sent his millions of adoring fans into a frenzy.
And a $115 million treaty settlement for Wairarapa iwi has passed its final reading in Parliament. The settlement for Ngāti Kahunganuki Wairarapa Tāmaki Nui Arua passed unanimously. It comes after a last-ditch appeal by an affiliated group, Wairarapa Moana, to be removed from the settlement so its historical claims can continue. But the Treaty Settlements Minister, Andrew Little, says last week's Supreme Court ruling in favour of Wairarapa Moana wasn't enough to hold back the settlement. It marks an end to more than 30 years of negotiations. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, on Tech Tent, a new AI chatbot which passed 1 million users in just a week. We also hear from tennis icon Billie Jean King on why she thinks tech will change the way tennis is played. Darren Bull from ADHD NZ on increasing adult ADHD diagnoses. And author Jock Phillips will tell us about his new book, A History of New Zealand in 100 Objects. Join us on Nights with Karen Hay after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. We're on air on rnz.co.nz and on your mobile. You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. From Northland to Waikato, also Bay of Plenty and Gisborne. Showers, some heavy, easing this afternoon and fine breaks increasing. Rain developing tomorrow, possibly heavy in the east. Waitomo, Taranaki, the Central High Country and Hawke's Bay. Scattered showers with thunderstorms possible, clearing tonight. Becoming cloudy tomorrow with scattered showers. From Whanganui to Kapiti, also for Wairarapa. Scattered showers, possibly heavy and thundery, clearing overnight. A fine start tomorrow, then increasing cloud and isolated showers from the afternoon. Wellington, Marlborough, Nelson and Bulla, mostly fine. Isolated showers developing tonight, mainly inland. Westland and Fiordland, cloud increasing. Rain developing south of the glaciers tonight, then clearing tomorrow evening. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, mainly fine. Patchy, low cloud in the east, clearing tonight. scattered showers developing tomorrow afternoon. And Re Kohu, Chatham Islands, low cloud, occasional rain clearing tomorrow morning. It's 8 minutes past 6. I will have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Nā mihi eho, no mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Tributes are flowing after 2 police officers and an innocent bystander were shot dead in an ambush at a rural Queensland property. The state's police commissioner, premier and prime minister have spoken of the community's shock at losing young police officers killed while doing their job. A heavily armed trio at the Queensland property were fatally shot by police, ending the dramatic siege. The ABC's Kira Jones has the latest.
Police are still piecing together details of the shocking incident in which constables Rachel McCrow and Matthew Arnold were killed in a targeted attack on an isolated property near Tara late yesterday. The gunmen have been named as brothers Nathaniel and Gareth Train. 46-year-old Nathaniel Train was a former school principal and was the subject of a missing persons report in New South Wales. The pair, along with a woman, were shot dead in a firefight with police. A neighbour who was caught up in the drama has been named as 58-year-old Alan Dare, also known as Andy. He was killed by the gunman after going to investigate.
Earlier today, Queensland Police Commissioner Katarina Carroll paid tribute to the officers who were killed.
It is an unimaginable tragedy. This has been incredibly distressing and tragic for everyone, particularly family, officers involved, colleagues, the organisation and the community. As you would appreciate, it is an extremely emotional and challenging time for the Queensland Police Service. This event is the largest loss of life, police life, we have suffered in a single incident in many years. I can confirm the 2 officers who tragically lost their life overnight were Constable Matthew Arnold, 26 years old, Constable Rachel McCrow, 29 years old, and they were both from Tara Police Station. My heartfelt sympathies and condolences go out to their loved ones, friends and colleagues.
Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says it's a devastating day.
This is not a price that anyone who puts on the uniform should ever pay. We can never count the true cost. My heart goes out to the families and loved ones of all those affected by this tragedy. With honour, they served, and Australia mourns with you today.
The alleged offenders were shot dead by Special Operations Police. One of those killed has been named as Nathaniel Train. Mystery still surrounds his part in the shootings. He was reported as missing from Dubbo, but before that he was a primary school principal in Walgett. The ABC's Nick Lowther says it'll be a shock to the small town.
They'd seen him as someone who was passionate about education in the town. He was very vocal, that he was pretty well known. I mean, there are pictures today we've seen of him being dressed up for Christmas. He's being involved with kids. And one of the things through this period is that Nathaniel had spoken about working at what he called troubled schools and being involved in this process. So the period of time from when Nathaniel has left the school to now remains the mystery, and it's not for us to understand. But this period before he left, he was a very passionate educator. It's got Walgett people quite shocked today. I think the school community is reeling, and New South Wales Education have said they've got a full support and counselling system in for staff and for some students too. Remembering he was only principal up until the times of the lockdowns of last year, which is when he did decide to leave.
The ABC's Nick Lowther there. The disgraced cryptocurrency entrepreneur Sam Bankman-Fried has been arrested in the Bahamas and now faces extradition to the US. The collapse of his company, FTX, left customers unable to access billions of dollars worth of crypto. Just days ago, he said he still hoped to make enough money to pay back victims, potentially by starting another company. As the BBC's David Willis reports, the arrest comes amid several investigations.
We have a statement from the Attorney General
General of the Bahamas, that's Ryan Pinder, in which he says that the arrest follows the receipt of formal notification, as they say here, from the United States that it has filed criminal charges against SBF and is likely to request his extradition to the US. Now, as a result of the notification received and the materials provided therewith, it was deemed appropriate for the Attorney General to seek Mr. Bankman-Fried's arrest, it says here. Now, this is thought to be the result of the receipt of a sealed indictment from New York prosecutors. We don't know what is in that indictment. We don't know what sort of charges they want to bring against Mr. Bankman-Fried, but it's expected that those details more of those details will be released tomorrow.
Sam Bankman-Fried was one of the darlings of the crypto industry not long ago, worth tens of billions of dollars. His net worth is now virtually nil.
Mr. Bankman-Fried, of course, has remained in the Bahamas since the collapse of that company, and he moved there. He moved FTX's headquarters to Nassau, which is the capital of the Bahamas, last year. It had previously been based in Hong Kong. He has acknowledged in a series of interviews that he gave over the course of the final weeks of November and December risk management failures, as he's put it, but he's never, he said that he never knowingly commingled funds from FTX with another company, a proprietary trading company that he also runs called Alameda Research. And he has said on the record in the past that he doesn't believe that he has any criminal liability in this whole saga. Nonetheless, Mr. Bankman-Fried is currently being held in custody in the Bahamas.
The Libyan man arrested for making the bomb that destroyed a passenger plane over the Scottish town of Lockerbie has made his first appearance in a US court. But prosecutors in Washington say they won't seek the death penalty, rather life in prison. 270 people died in what remains the deadliest terrorist incident on British soil. The BBC's Sarah Smith reports.
Abu Agela Masood was told in court what the charges against him are and that he could face life in prison if convicted. He is accused of making the bomb that killed 270 people when it blew up Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie in 1988. 2 years ago, the then US Attorney General William Barr announced formal criminal charges against Masood. Why is it important that Masood is brought to the US and tried in an American court?
Well, from a policy standpoint, I think it's important to let it be known that if you attack Americans, you're going to be brought to justice, even if it takes 30 years. When we learned in November of 1991, when we came to the determination that this was the Libyans that carried out the attack, my own personal view was that it was not enough just to go and seek to try the individual agents who were acting on behalf of Libya. Obviously, the intelligence service doesn't go off on its own and do these things. So I felt we had to take direct action against Libya, and I felt that we should establish the precedent at that point that if you engage in this kind of mass atrocity, terrorist attack on the United States, that you'll be signing your own death warrant.
While Masood was in custody in Libya on separate charges, he confessed to his part in the Lockerbie attack. Are you convinced there is enough evidence to guarantee a conviction?
That's the standard we use in the Department of Justice, which is we don't bring charges unless we feel we have admissible evidence sufficient to prove to a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that the individual is guilty.
To Germany now, where more is emerging there about the far-right extremist group that plotted to overthrow the government. The German Interior Minister has warned they are not harmless crazy people, but suspected terrorists. The country's tightening gun laws in the wake of the incident. The BBC's Katja Adler has more.
Hidden in Germany's rural east, this aristocratic hunting lodge was at the heart of a plot to storm the German parliament and take over the country. All before Christmas.
There it is through the trees.
Ghostly silent now. On Wednesday, one of the biggest security operations in German history, with arrests across the country. The plotters included top military brass, trained to kill. And neighbours have told us that you had police here searching the property, and one of the policemen had commented they were looking for possible weapons and explosives. Hordes of weapons were seized in numerous locations. In the sleepy village, locals are still rubbing their eyes in disbelief. It's crazy, Christina told me, like a play, not real life.
I have friends and family who agree with the plotters. That scares me.
The alleged mastermind, dubbed the Putsch Prince, is hereditary royalty. The head of his family, who lives in Austria, told me he fears for their reputation.
We'd already distanced ourselves from him as a family because of his racist conspiracy theories. He was a bitter man who got in with a dangerous crowd.
Dangerous because they had weapons and were ready to use them, but police never believed their coup would succeed. What really worries the security forces here is that this is a moment of social instability in Germany, like many other European countries, on the back of the pandemic, with the war in Ukraine and the rising cost of living. More and more Germans say they're fed up with their government. They seem more open to conspiracy theories, and extremist groups say they're finding more willing listeners. Lockdown protests at the height of the COVID pandemic were big recruiting grounds for the far left, and especially the hard right in Germany.
We're not any longer talking about those outsiders that you can identify very easily from their way of living. We have Nazis in pinstripe suits. Extremism has grown like a cancer more in the middle of our society.
Death threats and attacks against those seen as the enemy, like this intelligence chief, have risen sharply. Security is being stepped up here, but the biggest worry for the German authorities is the new threat from within.
It is 6:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Russian forces are running out of weapons in Ukraine and are being forced to use ammunition that is decades old. Meanwhile, Ukrainian troops are calling for greater supplies from the West amid freezing conditions. Yet the war continues, as CNN's Will Ripley reports.
Just days before the official start of winter, Ukraine's military prepares for the deep freeze. Plunging temperatures won't stop frontline fighting, says Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov.
And it's important not only for Ukraine, it's important for Europe, it's important for civilized world.
Ukraine's goal? Reclaim all Russian-held territory, including Crimea, illegally annexed by Russia nearly 9 years ago in 2014. The defense minister tells CNN Ukraine urgently needs more weapons from the U.S. and NATO.
Are you getting the weapons that you need right now, in time?
You know that when you have a war, you will not have enough. We need certainly more, especially air defense systems is priority number one for us.
Have you been given an explanation why the Patriot missile defense systems have not arrived yet?
It's a long discussion with our partners because it's a very sophisticated and expensive systems. So I think that Patriot also will be in our battlefield, but in the next stage.
That next stage includes protecting the power grid from Russia's ongoing assault on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Russia fired hundreds of missiles just in the last 2 months. Regular Russian airstrikes with explosive drones made in Iran. Drone attacks plunged 1.5 million people into darkness over the weekend.
What's your best strategy to defend against these kamikaze drone attacks from Russia?
Every day, we're trying to find the best solutions.
Are drones a priority for you for developing drones? And do you think they could be a useful tool?
Certainly. We need drones for reconnaissance. We need drones for striking. We need anti-drone systems. So electronic warfare, it's a very important issue for us.
The defense minister won't confirm or deny Ukraine carried out drone strikes close to the Russian capital last week.
These attacks inside Russia, including 500 miles from Moscow, Ukrainian drones is what Russia is claiming. Is that what happened?
It's very important. Don't smoke in the dangerous places.
In other words, be careful what you start. Ukrainian officials gave the same coded answer after the bombing of the Crimean bridge in October. Ukraine never officially claimed responsibility.
They targeting our infrastructure because they cannot to have a success against armed forces of Ukraine.
He says Russia started this war, and Ukraine won't stop until they finish it.
In Peru, roads are blocked and vehicles on fire as supporters of former President Pedro Castillo vent their anger at his arrest. The anti-government protests began after the left-wing leader was impeached for corruption last week and detained for attempting to dissolve Congress. CNN's Claudia Rabaza reports.
Chaos and confrontation in the streets of Peru as thousands gather to demand a fresh general election and the release of ousted former President Pedro Castillo.
We feel betrayed because we voted for Pedro Castillo and we want our vote to be respected.
This outrage has led to violence from the capital Lima to Andalhuayas in southern Peru, where protesters have stormed the regional airport, forcing it to close. In this mostly Castillo stronghold, the violence has already turned deadly, with at least one person killed over the weekend.
The right wing today has shown us that it is brutal and violent, that it doesn't see the masses. It is not aware that the people no longer believe in these politics.
At the centre of it all, former President Pedro Castillo, who only last week attempted to dissolve Congress to avoid impeachment. Hours later, though, he was impeached and arrested. Prosecutors accusing him of a crime of rebellion, a charge which he denies. His arrest sparking anger on the streets.
We are here because they are violating the rights of our president. Pedro Castillo is still our president.
But not in the eyes of the law. His vice president, Dina Boluarte, has stepped into his shoes, though she hasn't had the warmest welcome. Boluarte says she's hoping to stabilise the country and regain support by bringing elections forward 2 years and promising to end corruption. It's a political crisis that is now reverberating across Latin America, with regional allies such as Bolivia and Mexico weighing in, only fueling further Peru's political divide and threatening to set this tinderbox alight.
A new report in Australia has found 2/3 of souvenirs claiming to be Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander are fake. The Productivity Commission has been looking into the growing Indigenous arts and wares industry and says phony goods cost artists millions. It's suggesting changes to product labelling to address the problem, but not everyone in the sector thinks that'll be enough. The ABC's Oliver Gordon has more.
Imagine walking down the street and seeing your artwork ripped off. That's happened multiple times to Soretta Fielding, an Aboriginal artist of the Wanneroo Nation in New South Wales.
Well, it's a bit of a slap in the face, really, because this is my livelihood. Seeing my art just taken and used without, a conversation or agreement, it makes me feel like I've been robbed, really.
It's not just the money.
You have no control of how it's represented, and Aboriginal art is always sharing a story, often about people and place. So your art's there, but the actual story and narrative is missing.
A new Productivity Commission report has found 2 in every 3 souvenirs claiming to be Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander are fake, and that only $41 million of the $250 million Indigenous arts and crafts sector makes it back to First Nations artists or creators. It's making several recommendations, including a new labelling system to ensure inauthentic products are clearly labelled as such. But not all are convinced it's the right way forward.
Mandatory labelling favours consumer rights over the rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to be able to promote and sell their artwork.
Quandamooka woman and chair of the Indigenous Art Code, Stephanie Parkin, says if products can be labelled as fake, they should just be banned.
There is no middle ground that comes with labelling the product as fake. So from our point of view, if it can be labelled as fake, then yes, it should also be banned.
It's the first major event of the Hollywood Awards season, and nominations for the Golden Globes are now out. Organisers are attempting to rebuild its reputation after celebrities boycotted last year's event over voters' lack of diversity and allegations of corruption. Now, Top Gun Maverick Elvis and Pinocchio are all up for awards, but it's The Banshees of Inisherin which has the most nominations. Take a listen.
If you don't stop talking to me, Colin, and if you don't stop bothering me, I have a set of shears at home, and each time you bother me from this day on, I'll take those shears and I'll take one of my fingers off with them, and I'll give that finger to you until I have no fingers left. Does this make things clearer to you?
Ooh, sounds a little bit bleak, but there are assurances it is also funny. The BBC's entertainment correspondent Colin Patterson has the details.
It's about feuding friends in 1920s Ireland. It's a very dark comedy, and it's from the director Martin McDonagh. People might remember Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri, which was a big winner at the BAFTAs a few years ago, and he's the director who made In Bruges, and he's reunited the cast from that, Colin Farrell and Brendan Gleeson, and they are both nominated today. That's got the most with 8. With 6, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. A very difficult film to describe because it is properly bonkers. It's part martial arts, it's part sci-fi, it stars Michelle Yeoh, the Malaysian actress, and it is so entertaining. All about multiverses. It's been big at the box office around the world this year, and now it is doing well at the Golden Globes, and that's good news for awards season for it, that the critics and the awards bodies are getting behind it in the same way that audiences have around the world.
Well, that is all we've got time for this evening. Don't forget the Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. If you missed anything from the program, you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi Apopo, and tomorrow from 5 a.m, First Up speaks with the Mayor of the Australian region where 2 police officers and an innocent bystander were shot dead in cold blood yesterday. Do tune in for that, 5 a.m. tomorrow. Ka te hoki mai anō Apopo whānau po Māori. We'll catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Good evening. Tēnā tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. Legislation to increase restrictions on tobacco sales has passed its third and final reading, with support from Labour, the Greens and Te Pāti Māori. The Queensland Police Union says a young female officer who survived a shootout in which 6 people died showed great bravery. The Prime Minister has apologised to the ACT leader for calling him an arrogant prick during question time. And prominent anti-vaccination lawyer Sue Gray has been released from custody in Nelson after being stood down by a judge for disrupting a court hearing. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7 o'clock.
This week on Our Changing World, science journalist Peter Griffin finds out about Methane Sat, a planned American-New Zealand space mission to monitor global methane emissions to help address climate change.